You probably think Artemis 3 is the mission where America finally puts boots back on the moon, right? The 2024 moonshot. The first woman and the first person of color walking across the lunar South Pole while the rest of the world cheers. Well, about that. On February 27th of this year, NASA quietly announced that Artemis 3 will not land on the moon. At all. Not the South Pole, not anywhere. The entire mission has been restructured into something else, and almost nobody outside of spaceflight Twitter seemed to notice. Here is what is actually happening. Let me back up for a second because the story of how we got here is genuinely wild. Back in December 2017, the first Trump administration signed Space Policy Directive 1, ordering NASA to return astronauts to the moon. The famous 2024 deadline came a year and a half later, when Vice President Mike Pence announced in March 2019 that America would beat Chinese astronauts back to the lunar surface before the end of Trump's second term. The mission that would eventually be named Artemis 3 was supposed to be humanity's triumphant return to the lunar surface, the first crewed landing since Apollo 17 in 1972. Then came the delays. In November 2021, NASA Administrator Bill Nelson pushed the target to 2025. By mid-2023, it was sliding to 2026. In January 2024, it moved to September 2026. By December of that year, NASA was publicly targeting mid-2027. 6 slips in roughly 5 years. But the hardware kept moving forward. On April 1st, 2026, NASA successfully launched Artemis 2 from Launch Complex 39B at Kennedy Space Center, sending 4 astronauts on a 9-day lunar flyby that broke Apollo 13's distance record by over 4,000 miles. The Orion capsule, which the crew named Integrity, performed flawlessly. The heat shield, the major concern after Artemis 1, came through re-entry without significant spalling. It was a genuinely spectacular mission, and the crew splashed down in the Pacific Ocean off San Diego to a hero's welcome. And that is exactly when things got weird. Because the success of Artemis 2 should have been the green light for Artemis 3 to lock in its moon landing, NASA did something nobody expected. They canceled the landing. The reason is a roughly 400-foot stainless steel skyscraper called Starship. Here's the truth. NASA will not put on a press release. As of this month, the SpaceX Starship Lunar Lander, the vehicle that is supposed to carry astronauts from lunar orbit to the surface, has never reached orbit, not once. In 11 integrated test flights from the launch pad at Starbase in Boca Chica, Texas, it has never completed a full orbital insertion, and 2025 was brutal. Flight 7 launched in January. The Super Heavy booster did its dramatic mid-air catch back at the launch tower. Ship 33 broke apart 8 minutes into flight, raining debris down over the Turks and Caicos Islands. Flight 8 in March saw another booster catch and another ship lost. Flight 9 in May destroyed both stages. Then in June, Ship 36 exploded on the test stand during propellant loading, taking out a chunk of ground infrastructure at the Massey's test site. 3 consecutive catastrophic failures. This was supposed to be the vehicle putting humans on the moon. Things turned around in August. Flight 10 actually worked. 8 Starlink simulators deployed from the payload bay. A Raptor engine relit in space for only the second time in the program's history. Flight 11 in October repeated the success with more heat shield experiments. Real progress. But then, nothing. No Starship has flown from October 13, 2025 to today. That is 6 months of ground time for a vehicle that Elon Musk publicly claims will be doing weekly flights to Mars. SpaceX launched 5 Starships in all of 2025 against an FAA-authorized cadence of 25 per year. The next flight is scheduled for May 2026, debuting the new Starship 5-3 design with upgraded Raptor 3 engines. That is the earliest this program has a real chance at breakthrough. And here is the thing nobody at SpaceX wants to say out loud. Getting Starship to orbit is actually the easy part. To land humans on the moon, Starship has to do something that has literally never been done in the history of spaceflight. It has to refuel itself in orbit. Not once, but many times. Here's how the mission profile works. SpaceX launches a Starship lunar lander from Texas. That lander goes to low Earth orbit. Now it has to wait there while another Starship, This one, carrying nothing but cryogenic propellant, launches and docks with it. Methane and liquid oxygen get pumped from the tanker into the lander. Then the tanker undocks and returns to Earth. And another tanker launches, and another. The number of tanker launches required is disputed. SpaceX publicly says around 10. Internal NASA documents from 2024 suggested roughly 20. Elon Musk has claimed it could be as low as 4. A Government Accountability Office analysis landed at around 16. Let us just call it a lot. And all of these tanker flights have to happen in rapid succession over the course of weeks, because the super cold propellant keeps boiling off in the vacuum of space the longer it sits. That kind of launch tempo for a single rocket program has never been demonstrated in the history of spaceflight. Cryogenic ship-to-ship propellant transfer in orbit has also never been demonstrated. Not NASA, not Russia, not anyone. SpaceX did pull off an intra-vehicle transfer on one flight back in 2024, moving about 10 tons of oxygen between internal tanks on the same ship. That is it. The actual ship-to-ship demonstration was originally scheduled for March 2025. It has slipped repeatedly, and as of today has still not happened. A NASA Office of Inspector General report released last month flatly stated that SpaceX will not be making the demo on any current published timeline either. Without that refueling test, there is no orbital mission. Without an orbital mission, there is no moon landing. This is where the story gets interesting. On December 17, 2025, the Senate confirmed Jared Isaacman as the 15th NASA administrator by a vote of 67 to 30. You may know him as the billionaire tech entrepreneur who commanded the Polaris Dawn mission in September 2024 and performed the first private citizen spacewalk. He is a pilot, a SpaceX customer, and a man who does not particularly care about preserving the status quo. In his confirmation hearing, Isaacman himself posed the question everyone in the industry had been thinking privately for years. Why is it taking this long, and why is it costing this much to go back to the moon? 2 months later, on February 27, 2026, he gave his answer. And this is the announcement that nobody outside the space community seemed to register. Isaacman stood at a podium in Washington and said the current Artemis 3 plan, jumping straight from a lunar flyby to a crewed landing at the most geographically extreme location humans have ever attempted, was stacking too many firsts into a single mission. The Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel had released its annual report just 2 days earlier, flagging high risk for Artemis 3 for exactly the same reason. So Isaacman restructured the whole thing. Artemis 3 would now fly in mid-2027, but it would be an Earth orbit mission. Orion and its 4-person crew would launch on SLS, rendezvous with one or both commercial lunar landers in low Earth orbit, dock, test propulsion and life support, and come home. No moon, no lunar surface, just a practice run. The first actual lunar landing would shift to Artemis 4 in early 2028. Artemis 5 would follow in late 2028. If this sounds familiar, it should. What Isaacman described is essentially Apollo 9, the mission in 1969 where astronauts practiced docking the lunar module in Earth orbit before Apollo 10, and then Apollo 11 actually flew to the moon. And Isaacman wasn't done cutting. In the same February 27th briefing, NASA also announced the cancellation of the exploration upper stage. This was the Boeing-built rocket stage that was supposed to give SLS extra lift capacity for future lunar missions. Development costs for the whole SLS Block 1B upgrade had ballooned to a projected $5.7 billion, according to NASA's Office of Inspector General, with EUS itself accounting for roughly $2.8 billion of that. Schedule had slipped from 2021 to 2027. NASA replaced it with United Launch Alliance's Centaur 5, a rocket stage that actually exists and actually flies. Then on March 24, 2026, at an event NASA branded as Ignition, Isaacman announced that the Lunar Gateway, the tiny space station that was supposed to orbit the moon and serve as a staging point for future Artemis missions, was being paused indefinitely. The HALO pressurized module for Gateway had already been built and shipped from Thales Alenia in Turin, Italy, to Northrop Grumman's facility in Gilbert, Arizona. The power and propulsion element was designed and already deep in integration and thruster qualification, all of it on hold. NASA is now pivoting the program toward a direct-to-surface lunar base camp, skipping the space station middleman entirely. The program that was supposed to beat China to the moon is essentially rebuilding itself in real time. Quick thing before we keep going. If you're finding this useful, subscribe. I break down what is actually happening in space every week. No hype, just the real state of the hardware and the program. Now let's talk about the spacesuits, because yeah, those are a whole situation too. The suits NASA astronauts are supposed to wear on the lunar surface are called AXEMU, built by a Houston company called Axiom Space in partnership with the Italian fashion house Prada. Yes, really. Prada is designing moon outerwear. Axiom got the contract in September 2022 for roughly $228 million. In June 2025, Axiom's chief technology officer, Koichi Wakata, became the first human to test the suit in NASA's Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory, the enormous pool in Houston where astronauts train for spacewalks. By early 2026, the suit had logged over 850 hours of pressurized testing. On April 13th of this year, at the Space Symposium in Colorado Springs, Axiom executives said they were nearing the end of critical design review. The plan is to flight test the suit in 2027, either on the International Space Station or on one of the lunar landers. That timeline works if Artemis 3 is now an Earth orbit mission. It works a lot less well if there is any political pressure to bring the lunar landing forward. And the entire contract is sole-sourced. Collins Aerospace, the other company originally working on NASA's next-generation suits, dropped out in 2024. Okay, now the plot twist. Because while NASA is rebuilding the Artemis program, China is absolutely running. Beijing's stated goal is to land Chinese astronauts on the moon before 2030. And if you look at what they have actually built, that deadline is looking increasingly plausible. The Long March 10 is China's new super heavy rocket. It has 3 cores and can deliver 70 metric tons to low Earth orbit. Its first static fire was in August 2025. The second static fire was in September 2025. On February 11, 2026, it pulled off a combined low-altitude flight demonstration and a launch abort test for the new Mengzhou crew capsule. It succeeded on the first attempt. The Mengzhou is a crew vehicle nearly 9 meters long. It can carry 3 astronauts to the moon or 6 to low Earth orbit. It passed its pad abort test in June 2025. It passed its maximum dynamic pressure in flight abort test in February 2026. The Lanyu lunar lander, China's equivalent of Starship human landing system, completed a full integrated landing and takeoff test on August 6, 2025, at a facility in Hebei province. In March 2026, a paper in Nature Astronomy revealed their candidate landing site, the Rimai Bode region on the near side of the moon. Meanwhile, China's Chang'e 6 mission returned 1,935 grams of lunar samples in 2024 from the far side of the moon, the first samples ever collected from that hemisphere. Chang'e 7 is scheduled to launch later this year toward the lunar South Pole. Dr. David Burbach at the U.S. Naval War College put it bluntly to the Christian Science Monitor earlier this month. Every ambitious thing China has publicly committed to in space, they have pulled off on the first attempt. And while all of this is happening, NASA's own Inspector General just released a report that should terrify anyone who thinks Artemis 4 is going to land humans on the moon in 2028. The March 2026 Office of Inspector General audit flagged major safety issues with Starship human landing system. The vehicle is 170 feet tall. The crew elevator from the cabin down to the lunar surface is a 115-foot drop, with no backup egress if it fails. There is no plan to rescue the crew if something goes wrong on the surface. And the uncrewed demo landing does not actually follow the basic principle of testing the exact hardware configuration that will fly with astronauts on board. This is what the Office of Inspector General is saying about the vehicle that was supposed to put the next American on the moon. And this whole situation is costing an obscene amount of money. According to NASA's Office of Inspector General, the Artemis program has spent approximately $93 billion from 2012 through 2025. Each SLS and Orion launch costs about $4.1 billion. The rocket itself, not counting Orion or ground systems, has consumed $31.6 billion alone. The Trump administration's budget for fiscal year 2027, released on April 3rd of this year, actually gives Artemis a small increase. $8.5 billion, up by $731 million. But the rest of NASA got gutted. Science funding was cut by 47%. Mars sample return, which Congress had already terminated in January, was officially killed. STEM education was eliminated. Meanwhile, the Isaacman camp is publicly pushing Congress to let them redirect billions that had been earmarked for Gateway toward the new lunar base concept. The end state is a NASA that is almost singularly focused on one thing: getting to the moon before China does. Everything else, the planetary science, the Earth observation satellites, the space telescopes, is getting sacrificed on that altar. So when is any of this actually happening? Let's stop pretending. NASA's own internal joint confidence level for when Starship HLS will be ready, from the Key Decision Point review, puts the date at February 2028. That is a year and a half past the current public target, and that estimate is now more than 2 years old without a public update. Eric Berger, Ars Technica's senior space editor and probably the most respected Artemis reporter working today, posted on X in January that Artemis 3 timelines are basically worthless right now, and that any real date estimate has to wait for either a successful refueling test or a successful uncrewed Starship moon landing. Neither has happened yet. SpaceX's own internal documents, leaked and reported by Politico in late 2025, reportedly cite September 2028 as the company's target for a crewed lunar landing. That would be Artemis 4 under the new plan. Many independent space analysts consider 2029 or 2030 to be more realistic than NASA's official 2028 target for the first actual American return to the lunar surface, which, if you are paying attention, is exactly when China says they will be doing it. The space race is real, and right now, the gap is closing. So here is what Artemis 3 actually is in April 2026. It is no longer the moon landing. It is a rehearsal flight in Earth orbit scheduled for mid-2027, where Orion will practice docking with a commercial lander so that Artemis 4 can attempt the real deal in 2028, or 2029, or whenever Starship can actually reach orbit, refuel itself, and land on something besides the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. $93 billion, 20 years of work, 2 Trump administrations, 4 NASA administrators, and the mission that was supposed to put the first woman on the moon in 2024 has quietly become something closer to the flight plan of Apollo 9 in 1969. The rocket works, the capsule works, the heat shield works. The vehicle that actually touches the moon does not yet exist. That is what is actually happening on Artemis 3. If you want the real status on every upcoming Artemis mission, watch this next.